Today, we're going to talk about toeing off on the rowing machine and how to fix this common rowing mistake. Toeing off can happen at any part of the drive phase, but usually happens right at the catch and also at the finish. Just as it sounds, toeing off is when we come into the front end and the heel is elevated because we want good compression. But when we press out, the heel stays elevated. We've activated our calves and we're pressing off our toes through the drive to the finish of the rowing stroke. And so I'll give you an example of what that looks like. And it looks like this. As we roll in, we stay on the toes as we press. We stay up on the toes. The heel stays elevated during the drive. And we put a lot of pressure and effort into our calves. The other place that toeing off can commonly occur is around the finish. And oftentimes this has to do with the heels popping off of the footboards as a function of losing connection between the feet and handle around the finish. So some athletes may not have the toeing off issue through the entirety of the drive, but may find that they come through, then their heels settle, they go through the stroke, and right at the finish, the heels pop back up. And that looks a little bit like this. Either one of these issues with toeing off either at the front end and or at the finish are not ideal for the rowing stroke. In another video, we went over the idea that rowing takes place from the knee to the armpit. Anything above the shoulder, anything below the knee in terms of effort, tension, work is not useful in moving the machine to its fullest, highest speed possible. And although toeing off comes from the land of good intention, which is you really want to get everything you possibly can onto the drive phase of the rowing stroke, it's not the most efficient and powerful way to take each stroke. In another video, we talked about the idea that as you roll forward, the heels come up. As we press, we want those heels to settle quickly, and we want to drive through the entirety of our feet across the drive phase of the rowing stroke. So it is perfectly fine, acceptable, normal as you come forward to allow the heels to rise, but as quickly as possible when you press, you want those heels settling back down, and then you can use the entirety of your foot as something to press off of for the entirety of the drive. Plus, when the heels settle, and they settle onto the foot plates, we're gonna get better connection in our glutes, hamstrings, low back. If we're up on the toes and we press through, then this is really a quad dominant motion and it requires a lot of knee activation in order to kick our way out of the front end. If the heels stay up, we have to kick our way out. Kick our way out. So we want, very much so, to allow the heels to come up, because if the heels come up, we can get further into the front end of the stroke. They come up just a bit. But if I don't allow my heels to come up, this is as far in as I can go. If I allow momentum to carry me in and the heels come up, I can touch the front of the machine pretty easily, actually. And so we want that. We want that extra couple inches around the front end of the stroke, allowing the heels to rise and settle. Rise and settle. Rise and settle. And so I'm beating myself to the punch here. That is the first drill that all of us can do who have issues with toeing off at the front end of the stroke, and that is top quarter of the slide. You don't have to do it with a ton of intensity. We're just looking to really get the motion down pat. And so what we're looking for, again, from here, this is as far forward as I can go without the heels lifting. So with the top quarter of the slide, I'm gonna allow myself to roll in, and as I come out, I'm gonna allow my heels to settle. So my heels are gonna rise as I come forward, and they're gonna settle as I press out. So they come up and settle, come up and settle, come up and settle. And as I become more comfortable, then I can start to put more pressure and really focus on driving down through the heels, allowing my feet to settle each stroke. And once I've done this for 5 or 10 strokes, I can go to normal strokes and really let the heels settle as I press out. So top quarter slide is a great way to address early activation issues or activation issues at all with the calf as we come forward. So we come forward, and if we allow everything to stay relaxed in the calf, we allow as much freedom in the ankle as possible, then as the heels settle, because we've allowed that freedom, we have not tensed up in the calves, we are dominating the rowing stroke with the legs, the quads, hamstrings, glutes, low back, that connection through the core, allowing the heels to come up and settle. They come up and they settle. And then we can really press through with the most amount of strength because we're activating the most muscles. And we're not relying on smaller muscle groups, which are your calves, therefore staying much more efficient, much more powerful throughout each rowing stroke. We are working very hard to press away from the machine. We want to push the machine away from us. But sometimes that focus can manifest in staying on the toes and trying to push away and toe off from the machine. So something that works for a lot of people in terms of the focus of the drive is less about feeling that you're pushing away and more about the feeling that you are pushing your knees and legs down. Same effect of that press away from the machine, but if we focus on pressing the knees down, accelerating the legs down, that's going to help the heels settle, and it's going to give us that intended effect of pressing away. And so it's really just a mentality thing, but as we row, we want to think knees up and down, up, down, up, down. And we want to accelerate the legs down, accelerate the knees down, and that can help because we're focused on a downward motion. That downward motion helps the heel settle, helps transfer power directly through flat feet against the footboards. Again, any effort in rowing that is made below the knee, above the shoulder, is not effort that's going to manifest well in terms of speed and efficiency on the machine. So in a lot of ways, we're just shutting off our lower leg. Shutting it off. There's no tightness in the ankle, no tension in the ankle. There is no tension in the knees. There is no activation of the calves. Learning how to shut off those muscles is hard at first when you're learning how to row because you understand it's a full body workout and you really want to press with everything you've got across the drive. And a lot of times that can manifest in activating the calves, which will tire out very quickly, and it doesn't really contribute to speed. And so really focus on allowing, yes, absolutely allow the heels to come up because that's what gives us that good compression into the front end. But when you press these knees down so those heels settle quickly and you're in the most powerful position to press. Now, the second place that toe off can occur is around the finish. And that can happen in two different ways. One, we come into the front end, the heels elevate, they stay elevated across the entirety of the drive through to the finish, and we never settle our heels. That's one possibility of toeing off at the back end. But usually the way that toeing off at the back end manifests is an athlete gets it right through the majority of the stroke, and then right at the end, there's just that little insistence to add that little bit more. So we come through, the heels settle, we press, and then right at the end, we toe off. And usually that toe off is due to an athlete trying to get just that extra bit of length at the back end of the stroke. And the way that that can start to look is as follows. Now visually pretty harmless, and at lower stroke ratings, kind of harmless, but what can happen because of this toe off at the back end is we find ourselves further and further back in our rowing stroke. And the further back we are, the more effort, time, and coordination it takes to get back to the front end of the rowing stroke. So at 18, 20, 22 strokes per minute, you may not even notice that you're toeing off. But if you're doing a 500 meter effort, 1,000 meter piece, 2,000 meters, you're at 30 strokes per minute or higher than 30 strokes per minute, maybe you're at 32 or 34, wherever you are. As intensity goes up, as stroke rating goes up, if we find ourselves getting extra back here, that is going to cost us on the return and can prevent us within the rhythm we're trying to row from fully reaching the front end again. So there's diminishing returns at the finish, and we've done a lot of this work in other videos. The feet out video, teaching the boundary of the finish and how far back we can lean and still maintain pressure on the horizontal plane. If you haven't seen that video, I would encourage it. But because we are strapped in on the rowing machine, we can get away with things sometimes. And one of those things is that toe off at the back end. When the heels come up, those foot straps are keeping me in place, and I can just pull against them to come forward. It's not ideal, because if we're that far back and have to pull on the foot straps to come forward, then we've lost connection with the foot plates at one point. If our heels are popping off and I'm feeling pressure against the top of my foot, there's no longer pressure going into the foot boards. And the footboards are the only thing that doesn't move on the machine. It is strapped, bolted into the machine. It is what we press from. This seat moves, the handle moves, everything moves. Where we have to put all of our power, effort, and energy is into the feet, into the footboards. So if we're losing connection with the footboards, we can't possibly be driving the machine on. So it might feel like, oh, look at how far back I'm getting all this extra length, and I've used my calves to just make sure that I've got that little chef's kiss at the end to send it off. You're not even connected with the foot plates. You're not putting any energy, any wattage into the rowing machine. So we really want to make sure that we're not allowing these heels to pop up. So I go into much greater detail in the video itself on feet out, but feet out rowing is going to be a great way for you to correct your toeing off at the back end, because you simply can't do it feet out. If you lose connection between the feet and the handle around the back end, if you lean back too far on the back end, you don't have these straps to hold you in. And so if you go and you toe off, your feet are coming out. Each stroke, your feet are coming out. You're losing connection. We lean back too far, we toe off, we're gonna lose connection. So instead, when it comes to feet out rowing, keep that mentality we spoke about earlier, which is allow the heels to rise, but then press those legs straight down, lean to a solid finish point that as you're squeezing the handle to the body, you still feel pressure underneath your feet each stroke. And that looks like this. As long as there is pressure against feet and handle, it gives you the illusion that the feet are strapped in. And if you watch any of my videos, you'll notice 90% of the demonstrations are done feet out. You can do a lot of work on the rowing machine feet out, not needing the foot straps. On a rowing machine, you can get up to about 24, 26 strokes per minute. Then I'd advise you to put the foot straps in, because no matter how good you are, at that intensity, that movement, it's very difficult to get the turnaround back into the front end without just a little bit of security of foot straps over your feet. But as much as possible, we want to row the machine the way we do feet out. Any stroke rating, any intensity, any duration, we want to row the machine as if our feet are out. So the next time that you're on the machine, really take stock of how your feet are moving, how your heels are rising and settling, if they're settling, if you're toeing off at the front end, if you're toeing off at the back end, and use that top quarter drill coupled with the focus of driving your legs down to make sure that the heels settle and that we don't stay utilizing our calves and our toes as the mechanism to press from. And at the back end, take stock of whether or not your feet are popping up at the finish. You can see how it's connected to this hinge, this extra hinge back That's how those feet are popping up. The heels pop up because of that. Take stock of that and think, well, what if I row feet out? And just make sure that the heels settle and I maintain pressure against feet and handle at the finish of the rowing stroke. If you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, share it with your friends and teammates, and know there'll be even more rowing content coming to you soon.